Welcome to Communicate to Lead, the podcast that empowers leaders and aspiring leaders to communicate with clarity and impact. I'm Kele Belton, CEO and successful entrepreneur, and your host for today. I'm here to equip you with all the essential tools and strategies to master effective communication and lead your team to success. As the founder and CEO of the Tailored Approach, my goal is to empower you to be the best leader you can be. So sit back, relax, and join me in today's episode as we dive into the art of communicating like a true leader.
She was dependable. That was the word her manager used in every performance review. Dependable. She was the one who smoothed things over when tensions ran high. She kept projects on track when deadlines shifted. She made sure the team had what they needed before she asked for anything herself. And she was praised for it regularly. Her manager told her she was invaluable to the team. Her colleagues relied on her. She was one of the people everyone called when something needed to get done. But 3 years in, and she had still not been promoted. She had not been invited to the leadership offsite. She had not been given a stretch assignment or included in the conversations where the real strategy was being set. And when she finally asked her manager directly about her path to senior leadership, the response was, "You are not quite ready yet. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great." She left that meeting and spent 2 weeks, wondering what she was doing wrong. Was she not communicating her value clearly enough? Was she too quiet in certain meetings? Was she not strategic enough in how she presented her work? What she did not yet have language for was this. The environment she was working in was not giving her the development, access, or support she needed to grow. And the moment she understood that, so much changed. Not because the environment changed overnight, but because she stopped trying to fix herself and started responding strategically to what was actually in front of her. That is what we're talking about today. Welcome back to Communicate to Lead. I'm your host, Kele Belton, communication and leadership facilitator, coach, and consultant. This is the podcast where high-performing women in leadership learn to communicate with clarity, authority, and intention so that your work, your voice, and your vision get the recognition they deserve. If you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found the show. And if you have been here for a while, thank you for coming back. We are in the middle of a 3-part series this April on what keeps women leaders from being fully seen. In part 1 that aired last week, we looked at how perfectionism quietly creates a visibility ceiling from the inside. If you have not heard that episode yet, I'm linking to it in the show notes, because it's a strong foundation for today's conversation. So I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. Today is part 2, and we are moving from the internal to the external, because here is something I want to say clearly right at the start. Not every leadership struggle is a confidence issue. Not every time you feel stuck, overlooked, or underestimated is a sign that something is wrong with you. Sometimes the environment itself is the source of the friction, and learning to tell the difference is one of the most important leadership skills you can develop. By the end of this episode, you will have a framework called A.N.C.H.O.R, A.N.C.H.O.R method that gives you both a way to assess what is happening in your work environment and a set of strategic responses that you can start using immediately. I will introduce each letter of the framework as we move through the episode, and then I will recap all 6 at the end so they land clearly. Before we dive in, I want to pause and ask for your help with something. If this podcast has been useful to you, if even one episode has given you a new way to think about your leadership or a strategy you actually use, would you take 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? Every review helps more women leaders find this show. It signals to the algorithm that this content is worth surfacing. And that means another woman who's navigating exactly what you have been through has a better chance of finding it. A sentence or 2 about what resonated with you is all it takes. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely grateful for them. Now, let's get into today's episode. Let me start with a reframe, because I think it matters before anything else. When women leaders feel stuck, overlooked, or undervalued, the default assumption, both from the outside and often from within, is that something internal needs to be fixed, changed, shifted, tweaked. more confidence, better communication, a stronger executive presence, a clearer personal brand. And sometimes that is true. Last week, we talked about perfectionism, and that is a real internal pattern worth working on. But here's what I also know from my coaching work. Some of the most capable, strategic, and well-prepared women I have worked with were not struggling because of a skills gap. They were navigating environments that made growth harder than it needed to be. An unsupportive environment does not always look dramatic. It rarely involves overt hostility or obvious bias. More often, it looks like vague expectations that keep shifting, feedback that feels inconsistent depending on who is giving it, credit that gets distributed unevenly, opportunities that seem to go to certain people without a clear or transparent process, conversations about advancement that never quite translate into actual support. The goal of today's episode is not to label every difficult workplace as toxic, and it is not to suggest that every challenge you face is someone else's fault. The goal instead is to give you a clear lens for distinguishing between a challenge that is yours to work on and a pattern that belongs to the environment, so you can respond to each one strategically rather than absorbing both as personal failure. That distinction is not just emotionally important, it is strategically essential because the response to a confidence gap and the response to a structural pattern are completely different. And if you're applying the wrong solution to the wrong problem, you will keep working harder without seeing different results. Let me define what I mean by an unsupportive work environment, because this term can feel vague if we are not specific. So an unsupportive work environment is one where women leaders do not consistently receive the clarity, trust, access, fairness, or even development they need to grow. It is not necessarily a place where people are unkind or where the culture is visibly broken. It can be a place where things look fine on the surface, while certain patterns quietly undermine the advancement of specific people. Here are 6 patterns I see most. Pattern 1 is all about vague or shifting expectations. For example, you are held accountable for outcomes without ever being given clear standards for what success actually looks like. The goalposts keep moving. You hit a target and the conversation shifts to a new one without acknowledgement of what you already achieved. You ask for clarity and receive something broad enough to mean almost nothing. This pattern is particularly corrosive because it makes it impossible to demonstrate readiness. If the definition of ready keeps changing or shifting, you can never quite arrive. That's pattern 1. Here's pattern 2, unequal access. Decisions get made in conversations you are not part of. You are expected to execute on strategies you were not consulted on. The informal networks where relationships, opportunities, and visibility are built operate in spaces you have not been invited into. This is not always intentional, by the way. Sometimes it's a byproduct of how networks form naturally around similarity and familiarity. But the impact is still the same. You are doing the work without access to the rooms where the work gets recognized and rewarded. Pattern 3, credit imbalance. Your ideas surface in meetings and get attributed to someone else. You contribute significantly to a project and your name is absent from the recognition. You watch your recommendations get implemented after being initially dismissed, only to be praised when they succeed under someone else's ownership. A client, let's call her Renee, described it to me this way. I stopped sharing my ideas in certain meetings because I kept watching them come back to me later with someone else's name on them. So I started keeping quiet. And then my manager told me I needed to be more vocal and contribute more strategically. So what happened essentially was the environment shaped the behavior, and then the behavior became part of how she was evaluated. Here's pattern 4, and it's all about bias feedback. The same behavior can be interpreted differently depending on who is doing it. A man who pushes back on a decision may be seen as decisive and direct. A woman who does the same may be described as difficult or emotional. A man who asks for a promotion may be seen as ambitious, while a woman who does the same may be told she needs to be patient or demonstrate more. Research on performance reviews has often found that women receive more subjective personality-based feedback, while men receive more specific skills-based feedback tied to outcomes. That difference in feedback quality compounds over time into a difference in advancement. Pattern 5. And this one is what I call the team player trap. This one deserves its own moment because it is so common and yet so easy to miss. Being a team player is genuinely valuable. Collaboration, generosity, and reliability are real leadership strengths. The pattern I'm describing is something slightly different. When be a team player becomes code for taking on behind the scenes coordination, smoothing, and emotional labor without the visibility, credibility, or authority that should come with it. That means you are dependable. You are the one who does the work. You keep projects moving and people aligned, and you are praised for it. But you're not always being developed, elevated, or positioned as a strategic leader. You are doing the behind the scenes work that keeps everything running, but you are not always getting the credit or the visibility that should come with it. The distinction matters here. A contribution that is seen and credited builds visibility, while a contribution that is invisible, expected, and unattributed can lead to resentment and stagnation. That's pattern 5. The last pattern, pattern 6, is all about advancement without a pathway. For example, the organization says it values growth and development. There are conversations about your potential. You are told your time is coming. But when you look for a concrete path, a clear set of criteria, a sponsor who's actively advocating for you, or a timeline with real accountability, it's not there. This pattern often coexists with pattern 1. Vague expectations and vague advancement criteria tend to travel together. And together they create a situation where you can work hard and perform well for many, many years without moving forward, because the system for moving forward was never clearly defined in the first place. So let's talk about what these environments do to your leadership, because I think it is the emotional heart of this episode. Understanding what supportive environments do to strong leaders over time is important, not because I want you to feel discouraged, but because I want you to be able to recognize these shifts in yourself as signals rather than character flaws. Here's what I see happen consistently. You start self-monitoring. You become more careful about how you phrase things, when you speak up, and how much space you take up. You are not being timid. You are being strategic in a system where the cost of being misread has been real. You start over-explaining. You add more context than you need to, more caveats, more qualifications, because you have learned that your contributions get questioned in ways that your colleagues' contributions do not. You start over-functioning. You take on more, do more, deliver more, because you are trying to build a case so airtight that advancement becomes undeniable. What you may not realize is that the system you are trying to convince is not always responding to effort alone. It is responding to visibility and sponsorship, which the environment is not providing for you. And finally, you pull back from risk. You stop raising ideas that are not fully formed. You stop volunteering for stretch opportunities unless you are certain you will succeed. You stop asking for things because you have learned that the answer is likely to be a version of not yet. And over time, some of the most capable women I have worked with start to internalize all of these. They begin to wonder if they are the problem. They start to question whether they are ready, whether they are strategic enough, and whether they belong at the level they have been working towards. That self-questioning is often a response to repeated environmental signals, not an accurate measure of your ability. And that is exactly why you need a framework for telling the difference. Okay, so let's dive into the framework that can help you assess and respond strategically. The anchor method gives you 6 moves, 3 for assessing what is actually happening in your environment, and 3 for deciding how to respond. And as promised, I will walk you through each one of these letters and recap the entire framework at the end so that you have a clear picture of what the anchor method is and how you can use it. The A in anchor stands for assess the pattern, not the moment. One difficult conversation does not define the environment. One piece of critical feedback does not mean the system is working against you. One missed opportunity might genuinely be about timing. What you are looking for is pattern. When you zoom out from a single frustrating interaction and you look at the last 3 to 6 months, what do you see? Is the feedback you receive consistently vague while your colleagues get specific direction? Are you consistently excluded from certain conversations while others are included? Is the credit imbalance recurring, not occasional? Pattern assessment requires some distance, which is why I recommend keeping a simple running document, whether it's on your phone, on your computer, or a journal. It's not a grievance log, but a factual recording. What happened, who was involved, what the outcome was. Over time, that document becomes data, and the data is what allows you to move from I am feeling overlooked to I can see a clear and consistent pattern of how visibility and credit are being distributed in this environment. The first one, I feel overlooked, is a feeling. The second one is an observation you can act on, and that's the A. So here's next, we have the N that stands for name what is actually happening. This step is about closing the gap between what you sense and what you can articulate. Many women I work with have a strong intuitive read on their environment. They know something is off, but they struggle to name it precisely. And without the precision, it is very hard to respond strategically or to communicate about it effectively to someone else. Use the 6 patterns from earlier as your naming vocabulary. Is this a vague expectations problem, a credit imbalance, a team player trap, an unequal access issue? Naming it accurately does 2 things. It stops the internalization cycle because once you can say, this is a credit imbalance pattern in my environment, you are less likely to interpret it as, I am not valuable enough. And it gives you a starting point for the conversation, whether with your manager, a mentor, a sponsor, or simply yourself. Next up, we have the C in anchor, and that C stands for clarify what you need. Once you have assessed the pattern and named what is happening, the next move is to get clear on what you actually need. Not what would be ideal in a perfect world, but what specific concrete thing would meaningfully change your experience or your trajectory right now. Do you need clearer criteria for what advancement looks like in your organization? Ask for it directly and in writing. I want to make sure I'm working towards the right priorities. Can we map out specifically what success looks like for someone at my level moving towards the next one? That's what you want to share in writing. Do you need your contributions to be more visible? Build the habit of communicating your impact directly. Send a brief summary after key projects that names the business outcome, not just the activity. You could say something like, here's what we delivered, and here's the impact on the team and the business. Or do you need access to rooms you have been excluded from? Ask for it directly. Say something like, I notice I have not been included in the strategy sessions for this initiative. I would find it valuable to be part of those conversations. Is that something we can arrange? Clarify what you need is not the same as making demands. It is the foundation of an effective conversation. You cannot advocate for what you have not yet defined. Next up, we have the H in anchor, which stands for hold your leadership identity. This is the step that gives the framework its name. And I want to spend a moment on it because it is one that gets skipped so often. Unsupportive work environments work on you gradually. They shape how you speak, how much space you take up, how confidently you advocate for yourself or not, and what you believe you are capable of. If you are not deliberate about it, you can find yourself leading from a diminished version of who you actually are, a version shaped by the environment's limitations rather than your own capabilities. Holding your leadership identity means staying connected to what you know about yourself as a leader, independent of what the environment is currently reflecting back to you. It means reminding yourself actively and regularly of your track record, your expertise, the problems you have solved, and the results you have driven. One practice I give my clients is what I call the evidence inventory. Every week, write down 2 or 3 things you did that demonstrated your leadership capability. Not your task list, your leadership. The decision you made, the conversation you navigated, the perspective you brought that shifted how the team was thinking. And over time, that inventory becomes an anchor. It is your record of who you are when the environment is not in the way. Next up, we have the O in anchor, which stands for organize your response. Now that you have assessed the pattern, named it accurately, clarified what you need, and anchored to your leadership identity, you are ready to decide how to respond. And this step is about being strategic and intentional about that response rather than reactive, like we know so many of us can be. There are generally 3 types of responses available to you, and knowing which one fits the situation is important. The first is to adapt within the environment. You identify 1 or 2 targeted adjustments, communicating your impact more explicitly, building a relationship with a specific ally, or requesting clear expectations in writing, and you focus your energy there. This works when the environment has genuine development potential and the friction is specific and addressable. So that's the first one. The second is to advocate within the environment. You have a direct conversation with your manager or another decision maker about what you need. You name the pattern you have observed and make a clear, specific ask. This works when you have enough psychological safety to have that conversation and when you believe the person you are speaking to is capable of hearing it. So again, the first one is to adapt within the environment. The second one is to advocate within the environment. And lastly, the third one is to evaluate whether this environment is actually the right one for you. Some environments can be improved from the inside. Some require a different strategy altogether. Sometimes the most strategic decision is to take your capability somewhere else that is better equipped to develop and reward it. None of these responses is inherently right or wrong. The right one depends on your assessment of the pattern, your read of the relationships involved, and what you know about your own priorities and timeline. And then finally, we have the R in anchor, and the R stands for respond with intention, not reaction. This final step is about how you execute whatever response you have chosen. Because even the right response delivered reactively or from a place of frustration can undermine the outcome you are trying to create. Responding with intention means choosing your timing carefully. It means framing your communication around outcomes and clarity rather than grievance. It means being specific rather than general. And it means holding your composure, not because you are suppressing what you feel, but because you have decided that your goal is more important than your frustration in this moment. One phrase I give my clients for specific advocacy conversations is this: I want to share something I have been observing, and I would like your perspective on it. That opening signals collaboration rather than accusation. It positions you as someone who is thinking clearly rather than reacting emotionally. And even if you're feeling emotional, feel your emotions, take a breath, and when you are ready, have this conversation. Because it invites the other person into a conversation rather than putting them on the defensive. Intention is not the same as passivity. Responding with intention can be very direct, very clear, and very firm. The difference is that it's driven by your strategic goal, not by the heat of the moment. Let me recap all 6 steps of the anchor method before we move on. A, again, is assess the pattern, not the moment. N stands for name what is actually happening. C is clarify what you need. H means hold your leadership identity. And O stands for organize your response. And then finally, the R in anchor stands for respond with intention, not reaction. There you have it. 6 steps, 1 framework built to keep you grounded in who you are and strategic in how you move, even when the environment is working against you. Here's what I encourage you to do before next week. Start with the first 2 steps of the framework. Assess the pattern and name what is actually happening. So that's your A and your N in the anchor framework. Just those 2 steps. Take 15 minutes this week to look back at the last 60 to 90 days in your current environment. Not to catalog every single frustration, but to look for a pattern. Using the 6 patterns from today's episode as your guide, if you don't remember, go back and listen to them again. Ask yourself which of these, if any, you consistently recognize showing up. Then name it. Write it down in 1 clear sentence. So you are not going to say, my workplace is difficult, or I feel undervalued. You want to write something specific. So you want to be specific enough to say, I am consistently excluded from strategy conversations that directly affect my work. Or you could say, the expectations for my advancement have never been clearly defined. Very clear, very direct. That one sentence is your starting point. It shifts you from absorbing the environment to analyzing it. And that shift in perspective is often where the strategic clarity begins. You do not have to solve it all this week. You just have to start with seeing things clearly. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. You now have language for what an unsupportive environment actually looks like, an understanding of how it shapes leadership over time, and a 6-step framework for assessing and responding to it without losing yourself in the process. Next Thursday is the final episode in this 3-part series. And I want to tell you what we are building toward because I think it is one many of you have been waiting for. We have talked about the internal block, perfectionism, and the external block, unsupportive environments. Both of those can leave women leaders in the same place, ready to contribute more, but uncertain about how to make their value fully visible. In episode 3, we are going to talk about exactly that, how to communicate your value before you feel 100% ready. Not with false confidence or performative boldness, but with the kind of clear, grounded strategic communication that makes decision makers see you differently. That episode is going to be full of specific language you can use immediately. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss that episode. If today's episode helped you see your environment more clearly, or if you have been carrying the weight of a workplace dynamic that you have not had language for until now, I want you to know that you do not have to figure all of this out on your own. You don't have to figure out all the next steps by yourself. I offer complimentary leadership clarity calls for high-performing women who are ready to get clear on what is holding them back and what it would look like to move forward strategically. In 20 to 30 minutes, we will look at what is actually happening in your leadership situation and map out a specific path to you. The link to book your call is in the show notes. These spots tend to fill up pretty quickly, so if the conversation resonated with you today, go ahead and book your call now. Until next Monday, my friend, I am Kele, reminding you that great communication is the foundation of inspiring leadership. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember to communicate to lead.